Hello, everyone. I'd like to call the Virginia Marine Resources Commission meeting, August 22nd, 2023 meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Branson, followed by invocation by Mr. Erskine. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for this opportunity today to debate responsibly and respectfully the Marine Resource Commission issues before us. Allow us the wisdom to impart fair and equitable items on all the agenda. In this we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our meeting. Welcome, everyone, virtually as well. I'd like to ask if there's any corrections, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. Mrs. Peabody.
I have one proposed amendment to the agenda, which is to review a request by the Nansemond Indian Nation for funding to remove an abandoned and derelict vessel on their property.
What item is that?
We can make that the last item.
Oh, the last item on the agenda? Okay, so do I operate on a motion?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Erskine, second by Mr. Minor. Any further discussion? That being said, all those in favor of the amendment to the agenda?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Peabody. All right. Minutes. Are there any corrections, deletions, or changes for the commission, by the commission members or staff for the July 25th, 2023 commission meeting minutes? Any changes? Nothing? No changes. That being said, matters before the commission.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve from Mr. Headley. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mrs. Lusk. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. All right, next, swear in VMRC staff and VIM staff that will be speaking and presenting testimony during the meeting. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. All right, Randy, you're up.
Commissioner, members of the commission, good morning. With your permission, I'd like to introduce two new staff members.
Yes, please.
Khadijah, would you stand up, please? This is Khadijah Payne. We just hired her. She's been with us about a couple of weeks now. She got her bachelor's degree at St. Augustine University in Raleigh in 2020. She went on to get her master's in ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. She had a brief stint teaching high school here in Hampton, and then returned in 21 to 23 teaching biology and ecology and environmental science at St. Augustine University in Raleigh. She's a Gloucester native, and she's back where she belongs.
Welcome. We're very privileged and glad to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Part of our team.
Kirsten, could you stand up, please? Kirsten's been here about 2 weeks longer than Khadijah. Kirsten Travis, she's a native of the Eastern Shore, attended Old Dominion University where she got her bachelor's degree in marine biology. She did intern for VIMS at the Watchprig Lab and has experience with both their seagrass program and bay scallop restoration. She did work for VMRC's Fish Aging Lab and in our mandatory reporting, and I'd like to suggest she's where she belongs as well.
Well, welcome. We're very privileged and glad to have you part of our team as well. Thank you.
All right, again, we have, ironically, no page one briefings, but I do have, I think it's five page two items. The first two cases are subacreage projects over 500,000 with no objections from staff. The last three cases, although one of them is missing the sentence, item C, D, and E are you're serving as the default title wetlands board. Item 2A, the Department of the Navy is requesting authorization to remove an existing magnetic silencing degaussing sensor array and install a new underground degaussing sensor array and an underground cable over to their existing data concentration shed in Hampton Roads, west of the Hampton Roads entrance channel near Naval Station, Norfolk, in anticipation of the proposed deepening of the Elizabeth River Harbor Channel in Norfolk. Item 2B, Norfolk Department of Public Works is requesting authorization to construct 122 linear feet of new steel sheet panel replacement bulkhead with clean backfill and a new concrete cap 2 feet in front of an existing deteriorating bulkhead on the Elizabeth River at the end of West Butte Street in Norfolk. Item 2C, Randolph and Dender Gill are requesting authorization to install 60 linear feet of riprap extending a maximum of 6 feet channel to main high water at their property, 2030 Channelview Terrace, situated along the James River in Chesterfield County. This is at the base of an eroding bluff. There are no vegetated wetlands involved, and we've coordinated with VEMS and have their support. Finally, the board is requesting authorization to construct a new 130-foot-long bulkhead, 2 feet channelward of an existing bulkhead, 4 18-foot low-profile groins, each with an 8-foot-long T-head, and nourish the groins with beach-quality sand along the York River at 361 Simpson Creek Road in King and Queen County. This also requires a BMC wetlands permit. King and Queen rescinded their ordinance a few months ago, a year and a half ago. They did add the sand to the project at the advice of the Virginia Institute of Marine Science to help nourish and pre-fill those cells for those groins. And finally, 2E, John Bland is requesting authorization to construct 2 50-foot-long low-profile groins, each with a 30-foot-long T-head spur along the York River at 195 Shore Drive in King and Queen County. The project requires a BMC wetlands permit. That's it, sir.
That's it. Any questions from the commission, from Chief Owen? That being said, matters before commission.
Motion to approve page 2 items.
Got a motion to approve all page 2 items from Mr. Erskine. Second. A second from Mr. Branson. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
We have one consent item. Item 3A, Afterworks LLC is requesting after-the-fact authorization to retain 7 uncovered boat lifts installed within existing boat slips at Lewisetta Marina, adjacent to Kingscote Creek at 410 Church Lane in Northumberland County. The applicant has agreed to a $1,000 civil charge and a $900 triple permit fee in lieu of further enforcement action, and the contractor has also agreed to a $1,000 civil charge as well. This was, and Jeff Madden may be able to add to this if you have questions, but they've been extremely cooperative and have consented to our recommendations for the civil charges.
Any questions from the commission? That being said, is the applicant a representative on this project for the applicant here wish to speak on this matter?
They're not here.
Is there anybody in opposition to this wish to speak on this matter? That being said, matters before the commission.
Probably move to approve page 3A item.
Got a motion to approve from Mr. Branson. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Have a second, Mr. Minor. All those, any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Randy. I think we're on to, we got closed council session. Is that what's next? Yes. Kelsey, I guess since you're not here today, we don't need to close session with council, do we?
No, we do not, sir.
Okay. All right, we're on to public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Can we please come forward now? Does anyone here wish to speak? This is public comment period. You'll have 3 minutes, Ms. Meadows. How are you doing?
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and the microphone for the record, please.
Thank you. My name is Christy Meadows. I'm from Silver Beach, Virginia, over on the Eastern Shore. And first and foremost, I want to thank you all for hearing us and listening to us. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Omega for keeping up with their MOU, because they have stayed the mile off the shoreline, as they said they would. And the beaches have been pristine. It's been great over there. But looking at the depths of the nets being 50 foot, I was under the impression they might go to 30 feet. in order to go 30 feet or 50 feet, you've got to go out 2.5 miles, because we've gone out and sounded the floor of the bay. A 50-foot net's not going to work 2.5 miles inside of the Eastern Shore or the Western Shore. And also, back when Governor Youngkin decided to get involved with this, he said he wanted a 2-mile buffer off of the entire bay. And they fought that, and then we finally got a mile. But if they went that 2 miles, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation now to start with. And I do believe Omega is trying to do stuff to help us, as we're trying to work with them as well. And I'm just asking that you all please consider that maybe this 2.5 mile might be a better idea than the 1 mile, because there's still going to be problems with staying so close to shore. But thank you very much, and you all have a great day.
Is there any questions?
Under 3.
Is there any questions from the commission for Ms. Meadows? Thank you, Ms. Meadows. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak during public comment? Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but truth, so help you God?
I do.
Can you state your name for the record?
Yes. My name is Debbie Campbell, and I live in the summertime in Silver Beach, Virginia. I brought my little buddy Eric with me today. Just here to tell you from the standpoint of a mother and a grandmother, this is the most precious time we have in a year, is the maybe a couple of weeks worth of days that he gets to come and stay at Silver Beach and be with his friends and enjoy fishing in the bay. We have little rods, we fish on the community pier, but we love it. And we take all of his little friends. Some days I'm down there with 5 or 6 little kids. I don't fish, I untangle, I bait hooks, I take hooks out of fingers, all of those great things. But, we've gone from a time when his daddy was catching stripers this big at his age to a time when, more often than not, they fish for a little while and there is no bite, and they give up and go back and want to watch their video games or whatever. A few nights, we'll catch some croaker about this big and we'll throw them over, we'll throw them back, we'll catch a couple of little spots, but that's it. The bay is dying. I have seen the pressure on the Rappahannock this year. They've left Silver Beach alone a little bit, which is a relief, but that's not what this is about. This is about the bay, and this is about however many families are out there trying to teach their children the respect of fishing, the lessons of fishing, the fun of fishing, and being outdoors. We can't expect children not to be on their devices with their video games. They go outside and fish and don't do anything but stand there with their bait on the hook and have nothing happen. The bay is dying, and we need your help. We have asked you and asked you and asked you. And, I feel at this point, this situation is under-regulated. This is not about what's going on along the entire coast. This is about what's going on in the waters of Virginia, and we need you to intervene. I beg you. Thank you for your time.
Any questions from the commission for the speaker? Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak during public comment on any matters that are not on the agenda? Please come forward. Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Please state your name in the microphone for the record.
Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Brian Watts. I'm the Mitchell A. Byrd Professor of Conservation Biology and the Director of the Center for Conservation Biology at William & Mary. My group works with birds throughout the Western Hemisphere. We work with most of the bird species in the Mid-Atlantic region. And I'm here to make a statement regarding the importance of menhaden as a forage fish for bird populations. I'm sure that you're aware that menhaden are important prey species for a number of our major bird consumers: bald eagles, brown pelicans, cormorants, osprey, great blue heron. What you may not know is that it's also important to species that come through. 30% of the gannets that breed throughout the North Atlantic stop in the bay in the spring to feed on menhaden. A large portion of the common loons from the northeast come to the bay in the fall and feed on menhaden. So the decisions that are made here don't just impact the local populations that we have. They're much more wide-ranging than that. I'd like to comment on what's going on with the osprey population in the lower bay. The Center for Conservation Biology has worked with osprey in the bay since 1970, and that was a time when the population was struggling with DDT. Reproductive rates in the lower bay were at about 0.5 then. They recovered to 2 birds per pair by the 1980s, and since 2000 they have declined to below 1. So in order for osprey to break even demographically, they have to produce 1.15 chicks per pair. By 2006, we were at 0.75. By 2021, we're below 0.3. This year, we were below 0.1. So we are way below maintenance. The reason that we finally decided to begin to make statements about this issue is that we had moved from several hundred chicks starving in the nest to now thousands of chicks starving in the nest in the lower bay. The reproductive rates that we currently have are unsustainable. We are lucky in Mob Jack Bay to have had 4 generations of graduate students that have worked with osprey intensively. We know what menhaden has meant to the diet. In the 1980s, menhaden was 70% of the diet to osprey. By 2006, it was less than 30%. It has remained less than 30%. Osprey can't sustain the population with only 30% menhaden. If you look at the relationship between reproductive rates over the last 40 years and the Atlantic Menhaden Relative Abundance Index, they are directly related. So if you regress reproductive rates on the Menhaden Index, the R-squared is 0.91. It's a significant relationship, and it's an incredibly tight fit. And so the regulations that we have currently are not adequate to support some of the bird populations that we have in the bay. I really appreciate the opportunity to address you all. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer with regard to menhaden in the lower bay.
Any questions for Dr. Watts from the commission?
Sure, I just have one question. Dr. Watts, thank you for coming here today. You talk about the abundance of menhaden, it varies, how it's changed in Mob Jack Bay. I understand where the study was done. What other factors would affect fish presence in Mob Jack Bay? Salinity, harmful algal blooms, low dissolved oxygen, all those have an influence on migration or presence of fish in a certain body like Mob Jack Bay, and I'm not that familiar with it, but I am familiar with a lot of these other factors that affect our water quality.
Yeah, just a comment related to that. So this particular intensive work over the last 45 years or so has focused on Mob Jack Bay. This problem is much larger than Mob Jack. It encompasses at least the lower portion of the bay. We're getting evidence now that it extends up into Maryland on both sides of the bay. In terms of other alternate hypotheses as to why it is that they may not be in Mob Jack, there are a number of things that have been suggested: development rates, water quality, sunspots, the Atlantic oscillation. A number of these alternate hypotheses have been put out there for more than a decade. We have the existing data to evaluate those, and some of the ones suggesting them still have not pursued those. Ultimately, resolving those alternate explanations will probably fall to us, and we'll start to take up, to eliminate those alternate explanations. The truth is that this isn't something that happened over the past 2 years, right? Osprey have been underwater since probably the early 2000s. And so our data suggests that we would have to restore the menhaden stock back to 1980s levels for osprey in the lower bay to break even. And so what I'm asking is that you consider bird consumers in your deliberations with regard to menhaden policy.
Any more questions? Mr. Erskine?
Thank you, Dr. Watts. I don't know if maybe this question is directed at the speaker or maybe staff that can address ASMFC and the ecological reference points, whether or not those adopted reference points recently would take into account predator-prey dynamics and or bird availability.
I'll just comment, we really appreciate the adoption of ecological reference points, and it's definitely a move in the right direction from the old models of sustained yield, and previous to that, the no regulation of harvest. What I would say is that that approach has not evolved to the point where it's protecting osprey at this. Maybe it will get there. Our hope is that it will get there. Our hope is that some of our data will help to move that modeling process farther down the line. We are not currently at the point where those reference points are protecting the osprey population. That's clear.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the commission?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak during public comment on an item that's not on the agenda? You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and the microphone for the record.
My name is Julie Kasmarsek. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the board. I spoke with all of you on July 25th. I am one of those bird consumers. I'm the conservation chair for Richmond Audubon. I've been a member since 1989. And since the meeting I was at in July, I have been driven every day working on the concerns with the osprey that Dr. Watts just spoke. National Audubon has nearly 2 million members. There's 610 chapters throughout the country, and what they have just done as of August 18th is issued an action alert throughout the nation regarding the menhaden reduction in the bay and the collateral damage affecting the osprey. Dr. Watts spoke to you all with the numbers, which I wish you would take to heart and act on. Because of the attention that the action alert received throughout the country, the alert was going to be taken down today. However, it's being extended until September 4th. So this will give each and every one of you the ability to sign that petition when you leave this meeting today to support the menhaden and the osprey. You've told us what you can do, what you can't do. Well, let's focus on what you can do. You can compromise. You can reduce the amount of menhaden that are being harvested from the bay to perhaps 55 million a year instead of the 110 million menhaden that are being harvested every year. You have the ability to do this. Menhaden is a public resource. It belongs to all of us. It belongs to little Eric over there, who's trying to catch fish, maybe not a menhaden. I'm sure that's not what he'd like to reel in, but that's his future. And that's something that all of you need to consider when you're making decisions. Help me understand why we can't reduce purse seine net use by 50%. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. I will be back. We'll continue this crusade. And I ask you to cast votes, not nets.
Any questions for the speaker from the commission? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Can you state your name for the record? and the microphone?
Hi, good morning. I'm Terry Cuthrell, and I am a past president of the Virginia Society of Ornithology. I'm a lifelong resident of the Chesapeake Bay, and I now live on the James River near Smithfield. I've been watching over my life the amazing recovery of the ospreys, eagles, and peregrine falcons from the days when it was rare to see even one of these majestic birds to my William & Mary College days doing field work with Mitchell Bird on all of these species. And I've watched their numbers increase during my adult life, all after the simple act of removing DDT from the environment But recently, especially in the last few years, I've noticed that the places in the lower James, a place that Dr. Watts is not currently studying, I've seen the things that he is also seeing in Mob Jack Bay. The ospreys come in March and April. They repair their nests, lay their eggs, the babies hatch, and then the activity at the nest stops and the adults disappear. I've observed the same pattern of failed breeding at a bald eagle's nest for the last couple years. And this is the first time in over 15 years that this nest has been active that I've observed this going on. So I'm really saddened by what's been reported by the Center of Conservation Biology, that the ospreys are struggling and dying because of starvation that they're experiencing in their first weeks of life. In the lower bay, the reproductive rate has dropped to unsustainable levels, as we've just heard, and it's the worst reproductive rate I've read since the height of the DDT crisis in the 1960s. And from everything that I've read that's reputable, the conclusion is that it's because of menhaden overharvesting. So there's some discussion about oxygen also in the bay. Well, I think we know menhaden has been called the liver of the bay because after the collapse of oyster populations due to overharvesting, menhaden is the only significant filter feeder of phytoplankton left, clearing the waters and helping to keep dead zones in check. Because of their value as filter feeders, once the menhaden, the keystone species of the bay, are gone, we have little hope for saving the bay. New Jersey stopped reduction fishing, as you know, before it was too late. Actually, this year, they've been called the mecca of striped bass fishing because of their proliferation of menhaden. And so we need regulation too in Virginia. None of us wants to see Omega leave Virginia on their own volition because there's too few menhaden left to exploit. So I'm going to reiterate what's already been said and asked by the Richmond Audubon Society to place a ban on industrial reduction fishing in the bay until the end of September, so osprey can have enough energy, the ones that are left, to migrate. And secondly, I'd ask that you make it a goal to restore the stocks of menhaden to the 1980 levels when the bay was healthy and osprey populations were sustainable. Thank you very much.
Any questions for the speaker from the commission? Thank you. Anyone else in the audience that wish to speak? Remember, everyone, the lights up here, you got 3 minutes. When it turns red, that's the end of the 3 minutes. I've been letting you go over a little bit, but just be cognizant of the fact it's 3 minutes per speaker. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name for the record and the microphone.
My name is Andy Cortez. I'm here today, Commissioner, to talk to you about a guidance document that I came across from a sister agency of yours, the Virginia Wildlife Resources Board. Recently, they adopted their own code of ethics and conduct to guide their agency. And I've had a good look at this document, and it really is top-notch. It's one of the finest ones I've seen. We all, if we're in a profession, subscribe to a code of ethics. Your officers do, these scientists do. We know how important it is for working together, but also for instilling confidence of citizens. So what I'd like to do today, and I'm going to be brief, I'd just like to give you a copy of these, just so you can take a look at them and maybe deliberate over them. Take a look at them, see if this is something that you want to do for this commission. And that's it. I just wanted to drop this off to you and give you something to look at. I hope you'll take action on it, though. Any questions?
Go ahead. Any questions from the commission? Mr. Cortez, we do have ethics documents that we sign when we're sworn in as well. There's nobody up here that is not being presented with that. All appointed officials are, by the way, and everyone up here is appointed. So, any questions for Mr. Cortez? Thank you. Ms. Hogg, I'll put this here for the record. Ms. Copy. Anyone else in the public wish to speak on a matter that's not before the commission on the agenda? Please come forward. Raise your hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Yeah, my name is Captain Mike Ostrander, and I run a small charter business on the Upper Tidal James. And over the past 23 years, I've been able to take my business from 100% fishing to nearly 90% bird watching. And from March to September, osprey are a featured species for me on the Upper Tidal James, and they're doing wonderfully up there in regards to their breeding. They do not rely on menhaden, they rely on shad and catfish. So luckily, they don't rely on menhaden. From my research, I've found that like 149 charter captains have gone out of business in the lower Chesapeake Bay, and I doubt they have a chance to do what I've been able to do since the osprey population is doing so poorly in the lower Chesapeake Bay. I'm also here representing the Virginia Anglers Club. We're a 100-member plus club, and we founded in 1961, and since the early 1980s, we've sent members like Parks Roundtree, Danny Nolan, Buddy Nolan. You might know some of these guys, I don't know. David Nobles. They've been coming down here for 40 years, you know, reaching out to you all for menhaden reform. And you've got members today like myself and Captain Chris Dollar and Andy Cortez who just spoke. So, you know, we've been coming down here for 40 years trying and reaching out to you guys just like most of the public here today. So we fully support as a club any change that comes, whether it's some kind of compromise or full, you know, banning of the commercial menhaden fleet from the bay. But reducing net sizes to reducing bait cap, whatever it is, the Virginia Anglers Club is fully behind it. We're a strong group of saltwater and freshwater fishermen, and that's all I've got.
Is there any questions for the speaker? Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else in the audience? Please come forward, ma'am. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Thank you. It's Lynn Evans Johnson. I'm on the Audubon board, and I fully support all of the wonderful environmental comments that have come forth this morning. Dr. Watts and a wonderful squad sharing. I'll make just a quick comment. Overall, human devastation of our natural resources is disturbing. I know we all understand that. I used to work with a developer for several years. We make choices, and some of the choices are just because we don't know certain factors. So I'm hoping that with the support shared and provided here, that the wonderful folks I'm looking at will be a tremendous team going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there any questions for the speaker? Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on an item that's not on the agenda during public comment? Come forward, please. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Can you state your name and the microphone for the record?
My name is Lynn Jenkins. I traveled here today from Carson, Virginia. I too am here because of the menhaden overharvesting. All the details of the factors you have heard and have been substantiated about presenting before me. I wanted to come up and speak for just a moment, not based on those factors, but on another. I know oftentimes when concerned citizens like this come to you all, you probably first hear us with your heads, which I'm just reassuring you we're not naive. As you all have before you, when you hear this, you're first thinking of, do they really have an understanding of how complicated this issue is? How many different agencies, companies, concerns, economics, income streams are part of this issue? And I guess I'm just here to reassure you that we are aware of that, but what we're asking you to do is, as much as your head, as human beings, listen with your heart as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions from the commission for the speaker? Thank you for your time. Thank you. there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda during public comment session? Come on forward.
My name is Jacques Van Montfrance. I live in Yorktown,
I need you
Virginia.
to, need you to speak in the microphone.
I'm
sir.
sorry. My name is Jacques Van Montfrance. Oh,
You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Sorry, I was jumping the gun there. Yeah, I'm Jacques Van Montfrance. I live in Yorktown, Virginia. And I wasn't planning on speaking today, but I feel compelled to do so. I just want to start off with a little bit of an anecdotal story that I think is a metaphor for what the real problem is in Chesapeake Bay. In April of this year, five friends of mine and I, bareboat chartered a sailboat out of Deltaville. We sailed across the bay to Nancock Creek, and I always take a fishing pole with me because I'm the only one in the group that likes to fish. And I didn't really expect to catch anything, maybe a bluefish or possibly early returning Spanish mackerel. I was using a little tiny 2.5-inch Clark spoon. It's 2.5 inches long, about 3/4 of an inch wide. And on the way back to the Rappahannock River, we passed into the shipping channel beyond Tangier Island, and something took the line, and it took us a long time to get this thing in. It was the biggest striped bass I ever caught. I could fit both my hands into its mouth. It was a massive fish, probably weighed close to 50 pounds. The thought occurred to me, why is a fish that size trying to strike a lure that's only 2.5 inches long? And the answer came to me when we were approaching the Rappahannock River. There were 5 purse seine boats with all the attendant net boats circling all these massive schools of menhaden. That fish was desperate to get something to eat, in my opinion. I worked at VIMS. I'm a marine biologist, and that connection, I think, was fairly evident. And to take this a step further, these fish breed in the spring, April and May. They come into the Chesapeake Bay to breed. This is a similar situation, I think, to the osprey. The ospreys are the canary in the coal mine. They are telling the story that there is something wrong with this whole fishery in Chesapeake Bay. So I'd like to encourage you all to consider restricting the taking of menhaden for not only the good of the bay, not only the good of the ospreys, but also all other species in the bay. And let me just read your mission statement, which is that the Marine Resources Commission serves as stewards of Virginia's marine and aquatic resources and protectors of its tidal waters and homelands for the present and the future. And I think that you all should act on this request by so many people here to restrict taking menhaden for a small period of 30 days. Thank you.
Is there any question for the speaker? Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak during public comment? Please come forward. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Can you state your name and the microphone for the record, please?
My name is Tomoko Hamada, and I live on the bay, and I'm a nature artist, and I paint osprey. I want you to see. An osprey is a magnificent bird, flying up and swoop up the fish.
Please speak in the microphone.
Yeah, I watch osprey all the time. Nowadays, they can't catch fish. There's no fish. And it's heart-wrenching to watch the babies dying in front of my eye. That's all.
Question. Is there any questions for the speaker? Nice paint. That's pretty. Thank you. Does anyone else in the audience wish to speak during public comment? That being said, going once, going twice. All right. Andrew, you're up. Deputy Chief Button. What's your harvest season?
Good afternoon, commissioners and members of the commission. See if we can keep you here till lunchtime at least, talking about oysters maybe. No, I'll try to be brief, and if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them throughout the presentation, but I'll be glad to answer any questions from the commission or others as we go. This is a public hearing with a proposal to amend Chapter 4 VAC 2720-10 pertaining to restrictions on oyster harvest to establish the 2023-2024 areas of public harvest, public oyster harvest seasons, and oyster resource conservation measures. So the Code of Virginia 282506 does have a oyster season listed in there. So if prior to October 1st, which is when that season by code starts, if the commission wishes for the season to be different than that in code, which is sort of what, again, many folks have seen this chart before, what the codified season is, which allows for hand tong harvest throughout from October through May in the James River. Most other areas, hand tong harvest from October through April, and patent tong harvest from October through March. So there is no dredge season and there is no hand scrape season established in code. We do that by regulation, and the commission has the authority under 282507 to open and close these public rocks. So that's when we have different length seasons than those. And the commission does this by code in order to protect and promote the growth of oysters. So in totality, the season that the commission establishes needs to be better for oysters and more restrictive than the season established in code per 282507 in most areas. There are certain areas in the Chesapeake Bay that per code the commission can establish seasons that are to protect and promote the oyster or clam fishery. So these are areas that can be open to more efficient harvesting gear such as dredges to support the fishery, and resource is of course always a concern to the commission. But those are specific areas where promoting the fishery is allowed by code, not just protecting and promoting the resource. And those areas are an area sort of off the western shore there, and then primarily the areas that we manage with dredge gear in the Tangier and Pocomoke Sound management areas. So that's what we're here to do today, is to discuss and establish a season based on those code sections. Just for reference, what we're looking at here on this screen is seasons from last year. So these were seasons that the first one on the, I guess on the left there, was a season that was approved this time last August. There was one emergency amendment to this at a public comment session that extended the season this spring, or late winter, I guess, and then another scheduled public hearing that further extended the season. And that's what you're looking with at the right, is the approved with extension. And again, what we try to do every year is break these areas up by harvest gear, harvest area, to sort of spread that effort out. That's sort of a snapshot of where we were last year. Just for reference, the rotations aren't always exactly the same, but this is the last time that many of the areas, and just for the folks that might not be as well versed in oyster regulations as others, many areas are managed on a harvest rotation, so they're open for a period of time every 2 or 3 years. Some areas are open on a 3-year rotation, others on a 2-year rotation. Others don't have a rotation, but the last time the rotation, or areas that would normally be in rotation, were similar to this year, was in the 2021 public season. And you can see this was a season that the commission approved at that time. Every year, staff works with our advisory committees and others to develop a recommendation. This is the staff recommendation, just to give you a quick look at where the staff recommendation is for this 2023-2024 public season, taking into many factors into account that we'll discuss a little bit more. I'll brief the commission on here later, but again, you can see that this is, if you look at area by area and total length of the season, already longer than the last time we had a similar rotation in 2020 season. So again, with that in mind, here's a brief overview of where the oyster harvest has been and where it is today. So if you go back to 1977-78, that's sort of a different bay there than it is today. And during this sort of the high part of the graph on the left side, this is when most of the fishing effort was taking place using hand tongs and patent tongs and some dredges in the Pocomoke and Tangier Sound area. This low point in the 1990s into the early 2000s that you're seeing there is primarily the result of disease epidemics and areas being closed to harvest to allow the resource to recover. What you're looking at here is sort of the, after decades of restoration and replenishment efforts, sort of the fishery starting to come back at the same time, many of these areas transitioning over to primarily a hand scrape driven fishery rather than patent tongs, which is what you are seeing here. Brings us to today where we're seeing in the 2022-2023 harvest season the highest harvest numbers on both public and private ground since the 87-88 season, with a little over 306,000 bushels harvested, which is in totality, if you take private ground and public ground together, a 32% increase in harvest compared to last year. The public ground was almost a 50% increase compared to last year. Again, going even further back to 57-58, you can see that the public ground fishery is producing at a similar level to where it has historically, in that 250 to 300,000 bushel range. When we're talking about millions of bushels being harvested off private ground, a lot of that was when millions of bushels of seed were being harvested off public and then reported as market harvest on private ground as well. Today's fishery on private ground is a little different. There still is a lot of seed movement. There's also a lot of shell planting, and aquaculture or containerized production is an increasing share of that market. But roughly over 400,000 bushels were caught off of private ground in the 2022-2023 time period. So generally that graph is trending up in the last several decades, and with that increased harvest, at least going back to 2022, the bay-wide oyster populations are also increasing. They're at close, prior to the last season, survey data anyway, close to record highs in many areas. So one of the things that we manage on is shell volume and market oyster density. So when areas reach a certain market oyster density, they can support fishing with less efficient gear types, or more efficient gear types can catch very quick limits, and that's generally good for the resource. And shell volume is one of the things that the fishery is dependent on for the future. So if the shell volume drops below 10 liters per square meter, we tend to see lower recruitment. In many areas, harvest pressure can bring that down. The Commission spends several $1 million every year replenishing these areas to bring that level back up and maintain the fishery. So that's generally good news that harvests are increasing. At the same time, our standing stock assessment, which covers close to 10,000 acres of oyster bottom surveyed annually every year between VIMS and VMRC, is indicating that in most areas, in most locations, the standing stock of oysters is stable or increasing as well. That's a little bit of background. Now I'll get to the meat of the regulation. It's shucking at least 7 pints, the meat of this regulation, by the way. Sorry, a little oyster humor there. So recent changes that are recommended to continue in 2023-2024 season. So these were implemented with ASMAC and staff concurrence a couple years ago, and we're recommending that these continue this year. So these include a vessel limit of 28 bushels for vessels harvesting by hand or hand tongs, an individual harvest limit for harvest by hand or hand tong of 14 bushels, maintaining hand tong as a gear type permitted in the upper portion of the York River, maintaining a harvest day ending at 11 a.m. for all gear types for the month of October. So this covers a shift in warm weather harvest to extend our harvest curfews till noon in the month of October, which was a change that was implemented last year due to higher water temperatures and public health concerns. Maintaining a harvest day that ends at 12 noon for all gear types except hand and hand tong for all months other than October. This is a bit of a conservation measure. It prevents if an area is getting worked down for continued effort to be in that area. Most areas last year, folks were catching a limit in less than 2 hours, so We don't anticipate this having any impact with the condition of the resource in most areas, and staff and SMAC are in favor of maintaining that. And maintaining Pat Tong harvest seasons in some areas to be concurrent with other gear types and other harvest areas. So this allows effort to be split up amongst both areas and gear types. So those are recommendations to continue for this season. There are some recommendations to the status quo, and we're calling status quo that 2021-2020 season that staff and SMAC are in favor of. These include extending the season length in the James River areas 1, 2, and 3 from 13 weeks, that's that roughly 3-month season, to 22 weeks, which is roughly a 4.5-month season. So with those recent changes in terms of gear types and concurrent harvesting areas, there wasn't the same focused effort in the James River recently. There's been close to 40,000 less bushels coming off of these areas than there had been recently, so we're comfortable with lengthening that season there. Opening an area in Larson's Bay in the Rappahannock River to harvest for the first time in more than 20 years. So this is an area that has been closed to harvest adjacent to a sanctuary area. The proposal is to open this area to a Pat Tong fishery, not the actual sanctuary area, but some areas that haven't had replenishment effort, but have been left unharvested for 20 plus years in this area. Opening area 4 in the Rappahannock to a 2-week season earlier in the harvest rotation cycle. So a typical 3-year rotation, the Rappahannock sees one of these harvest areas open for 2 months, or about 8 to 9 weeks every 3 years. This area was open last year for approximately 9 weeks. It was scheduled to have a little bit longer season than that, but the commissioner took action to close this area somewhat early. So we're proposing to allow a 2-week season out of that current rotation cycle this year. Extending clean cull harvest in the James River into the month of May. So typically this harvest would end in April. With warm weather harvest regulations in place, they would have to be in by curfew or use other refrigeration icing techniques. But there's seed oysters available there, and clean cull oysters are often mixed in with the seed, and this would allow them to just focus on harvesting clean cull oysters if there was a market and a desire to do so, or seed. Not both together, but again, extending that clean cull season into May. Shifting the harvest season in the Great Wicomico area to both December and January. So discussions with SMAC were in favor of having that earlier season in the Great Wicomico covering December. The previous season had that opening in January, with another area in the vicinity open in February. And then opening a portion of the Pocomoke Sound Rotation Area 2, known as Beasley Bay, during this season's harvest rotation. So there's an area in the Pocomoke Sound that is open to harvest last year, but because of the condition being so good in many of the other areas that were also open, this area saw very little harvest. And staff and SMAC are in favor of having this portion of that rotation open to alleviate some pressure or give boats another option to work in during this rotation, which will be good in the Pocomoke Tangier Sound, but not quite as good as it was last year, which saw some of the best conditions in a generation. So for reference, this is the Larson's Bay area. There were some discussions about finalizing the exact boundary, and staff will work with our law enforcement on confirming when the most enforceable boundary will be for this area to keep boats off this sanctuary, which is here. But this is the approximate location that would be open, proposed to be open for this year. Again, this would be Area 3 in this area. This is the Area 2 that was open last year, and this is Area 4. And again, Area 3 ran approximately from Mosquito Point to sort of the central location there on the Whitestone Bridge. And this would be the area approximately that would be proposed to be open to Pat Tongs. So in addition to those changes to the status quo, there are some changes that are part of the staff recommendation that staff urges a cautious approach to. So, I think they'll be okay, or staff thinks they'll be okay for this season, but these are areas that we'll want to monitor closely, that there could be a fishery that's different from what's proposed, either a hand tong fishery or not opening these areas to scrape. And again, we want to take a cautious approach, as right now the condition of the resource isn't dictating the amount of harvest, it's the amount of effort that these areas are seeing. So with that in mind, these are additional changes that are supported by both staff and SMAC, but that staff does encourage a cautious approach, particularly if the commission decides at any point to go beyond these recommendations. So these include opening California Rock in the Tangier Sound, which was open to harvest last year and saw a approximate 2-week extension on top of the season that was open last year. Again, opening this area out of the current tier rotation in the month of November. So typically these areas are open from December through February, and many of the watermen on the Eastern Shore, particularly in the Saxis area, have made a request to have something available in November. That would keep boats who decide to go oystering from coming to areas that are open on the Western Shore. There may still be some folks that are hard crabbing at that time. So again, staff is comfortable with this, but urges caution. And staff can support no more than a 2-week season to provide alternate fisheries to this area during the late fall. Opening York River Area 1 to hand scrape in the month of November. So this is a high-density, shallow water area that has been and could be open to hand tongs, and has been open this last year and had a number of boats catching 28 bushels there most days. It's a very shallow area. It's somewhat difficult to replenish. Generally, hand tong areas require less replenishment. There was a request from SMAC that staff is in favor of looking at spreading out this effort by allowing some additional areas to be open to hand scrape in November. And staff is supporting a 2-week harvest season. And that's going to be in the first 2 weeks of November to provide sort of additional product for that holiday rush. And that was SMAC request to, if they had to choose 2 weeks in November, that first 2 weeks provides oysters for that Thanksgiving market rather than the last 2 weeks in November. Another additional change that is supported by both SMAC and staff with caution is opening middle ground in the Coriatoman River to hand scrape. So this area is, again, it's currently in a hand tong only area. It had been a closed area in the past. It had a scrape season in the past. We had used it for removing seed oysters or some replenishment activity. So it's kind of shifted around. It's a relatively small area. The area that we survey is about 5 to 6 acres. The actual area that could be worked is a little bit larger than that. And they, again, can support this for a 2-week season, again, to address the SMAC request for increased product before the holiday season, so in that early November. To show the two areas, Beasley Bay and California, on a map. This is the Beasley Bay area here, so there aren't any monitored or planted oyster reefs in this area, but with increases in recruitment recently and some existing shell there are likely some oysters here, probably not great numbers, but again, this gives folks an option to go into these areas in that time period. And this is a California area in the Tangier and Pocomoke Sound that had that extension that has about 17 boats that work on Tangier Island that go out, but again, it was pretty windy last March when this area was extended, so that area didn't see everyone working every day there. So at the last August SMAC meeting, there were some recommendations put forward by SMAC that are not supported by staff. We're pretty close. I think we're much more congruent than we are farther apart, both staff and SMAC, but there were a little bit of some recommendations, particularly after January, that staff wasn't comfortable with at that time. We did agree at that committee meeting to schedule a January SMAC meeting with the intent of either having a public hearing in January or February to address any of these still unresolved season areas at that point. But again, at this point in August, we don't have the best information available yet to maybe make these decisions. And using that sort of cautious approach, staff is not fully comfortable with these recommendations, which included extending the season in the James River hand scrape area to close to a 24-week rather than a 22-week season, and splitting the harvest areas into 2 distinct areas. So it's basically having one portion in the James River open for 2 weeks in March and 2 weeks in October, rather than having both areas open congruently. So And it would in total allow for 2 extra weeks of harvest in the James River rather than 22 weeks. And again, this area was open for approximately 13 weeks in this last harvest. Similar rotation, so it's already longer than it has been in recent memory. And then the other difference, which again, I'll show you on the chart, doesn't appear like much, but it has the potential to increase pressure on distinct areas, is SMAC was in favor of staggering single harvest areas in the Rappahannock for close to 22 weeks. It's actually a little bit shorter than that, without having multiple areas open to hand scrape overlapping. Staff favors a 14 to 15 week season with more overlapping harvest areas. And this allows for harvest effort to be distributed more evenly between harvest areas. So if there's only one area open and there's 60 boats hand scraping, all 60 boats would presumably be working in that one area. If there's 2 areas open, that's not to say that they all won't go to one area, but it at least gives some boats an option to go to a different area. And if you have 60 boats for 5 months working one area at a time, that's going to lead to more harvest than having less weeks with more boats split out between more areas. And that's the reason for that difference on the staff level. Taking into account many of the recommendations from SMAC, staff came up with some compromises that we feel does address many of the concerns that were brought up by our advisory committee members, which do take the time out of their days to come here and provide recommendations both to the committee today and to staff, and we're very appreciative of these. These include a 15-week season in the Rappahannock scrape areas, with one area, Area 7, open for 2 separate 2-week time periods that overlaps partially with other harvest areas being open. Opening 3 overlapping areas to Patentong harvest from December through February. So this is actually a little bit beyond the SMAC recommendation. Overlapping the season in the Blackberry Hangs area. So this is another area that Mr. Headley will be familiar with there up in the bay off the Great Wicomico, and having this area open for a month of overlap with the Great Wicomico in December, rather than having 2 distinct areas open for that same amount or that same 3-month season. And then opening 2 areas in the Pocomoke and Tangier Sound out of the current 2-year rotation concurrently in November. So the original SMAC request was to have 2 areas with a 2-week season on either end of their typical 3-month season. And the staff recommendation is to have both of those areas open concurrently in November to, again, split that effort between 2 distinct harvest areas. And then allowing that other area in the Pocomoke, the Beasley Berry area, to be open during the current rotation in February. So that would be towards the end of the harvest season, to allow, if some of these areas are getting worked down, to open up another area to, again, split that effort out. Something to take into account as we go forward with the staff recommendation and for the commission to deliberate is with some regulatory changes made last year, we have seen an increase in the number of transfers from folks who, prior to that regulatory change, may not have been able to participate in the fishery. So prior to this regulatory change, which eased entry into the fishery, you were required to have 40 days of harvest to transfer that license. So usually you weren't seeing an increase in effort if someone was transferring out. It was just someone who was more or less a full-time fisherman transferring it to another person. We have seen an increase in the number of transfers that normally wouldn't qualify, and a little bit increase in that harvest total number of participants from 46% to 50% for 2022. That drop in 2023 just reflects the spring-only season, so that's why you're likely seeing that come down. But we would anticipate, based on the number of transfers and that change, an approximate increase of 7 to 14% in harvest effort for this season, 14% being on the higher range and 7% being sort of where we are now with those transfers. With that, this is the staff recommendation. I outlined those details there, and when I make a recommendation, I'll go ahead and put that up on the screen to sort of do a side-by-side comparison. But again, the major differences are going to be here in the Rappahannock and the James River, and 2 weeks versus a month here in the York River area. and the request for 2 weeks here in the Beasley Bay in March for the Tangier, or excuse me, for the Pocomoke Sound area in Beasley Bay. In addition to those recommendations on the season, again, the meat of the regulation, we are proposing some additional regulatory reduction and clarification, which are covered on page 15 to 25 of your draft regulation. I won't go into the specifics line by line details of those, but they're available to look at there, and those would be passed as written. The season that's in draft regulation likely will change a little bit, so what's in regulation will be changed based on the final commission decision. But again, these additional regulatory reduction and clarification changes made on page 15 to 25 of the regulation include clarifying that when you're harvesting oysters in the public fishery, 1 user fee and 1 gear license entitles you to 1 limit. So it has been pretty clear in regulation, but I feel like the changes sort of make that more clear. The vessel limits are unchanged from last year, so 28 for hand or hand tong, 16 bushels for patent tong, hand scrape, and dredge. Vessels and individuals shall only use one type of gear in the public fishery on any single day. So this clarifies that if you are hand scraping in the morning, you can't catch your 16 bushels and then potentially go hand tonging in the afternoon, either in that same vessel or a different vessel. So one gear type, that's your fishery for that day. You can switch back and forth from day to day, but not in the same day. The other clarification is the person, quote, working the gear does not have to hold a license or user fee, but a user fee and license holder must be on that vessel. So this clarifies instances if I have 2 user fees on a boat and there's 3 persons on that boat and I touch a dredge or a scrape to bring it in, is that working the gear? Maybe. Is driving the boat working the gear? This just clarifies that if there's 2 user fees and 2 licenses on the boat, regardless of the gear type being used, whether it's hand tongs, patent tongs, or scrapes, they're entitled to those 2 limits. So you can't agent it out still. You can't have one person with a user fee catching 2 limits, but if you want to put someone up with hand tongs on the washboard and they don't have a user fee, you can. If you want to train someone how to work a pair of patent tongs or a scrape and they don't have a user fee, technically they can work that gear as long as that appropriately licensed person is on the boat. The one distinction is by hand, which is on the seaside of the Eastern Shore, that the harvest must be undertaken by the license holder. By hand harvest is not a limited entry fishery. So if you have a commercial fishing license, you can go get a by hand user fee and by hand license for the Eastern Shore, so we didn't need to make that distinction there. With that, the staff recommends adopting amendments to Chapter 4 VAC 2720-10 pertaining to restrictions on oyster harvest as shown in Chart 2 of your eval there to establish the 2023-2024 areas of public harvest, public oyster harvest seasons, and oyster resource conservation measures. Again, this is a little bit busy, but you have both of those on your evaluation packet there. Are the SMAC recommendations on the left with the staff recommendations on the right. And you can see the major difference is this area of the Rappahannock. Staff has that 3.5 week, or is that, or excuse me, 3.5 month versus that 4.5 month season with more areas overlapping, and additionally more of the patent tong areas overlapping through February, and having all of the areas in the James River, these are the scrape areas, open concurrently for that 4.5 month season. Having this overlapping area in the Blackberry Hangs, again, the SMAC recommendation for sort of that same length season, but with less overlap. And then having this area in Beasley Bay, the Pocomoke Sound area, open for the entire month in February, and 2 weeks concurrent with the Tangier, California area in that area, rather than separate 2 weeks as a standalone, which was the SMAC advisory group's recommendation. So again, here's the staff recommendation, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Any questions? Thank you, Andrew. Is any questions from the commission? Mr. Button. Mr. Erskine.
Not necessarily a question, but I just want to make a comment, if that's all right. I think there's a lot to be proud of here from staff's perspective, commission, and industry. There's a really good story here regardless of some of the minor differences that may be had by staff and SMAC, but that first graph you put up that had over 700-some thousand bushels on public and private, that's come a really long way. And I think we should, take a minute and be proud of the fact that this commission's done a lot, staff and industry. It takes a lot to get to that point. So there might be some minor differences here, but the management has been spot on to see this kind of harvest. It's pretty impressive. So thank you for the presentation.
Any further questions from the commission? Mr. Headley?
Back to the chart that you had from like the late 70s through the time right now. When the population of oysters or the catch was the biggest in the late 70s and the early 80s, was there a limit, like a bushel limit like we are under now?
There was at different times. It was different. I don't know offhand what the limit was for specific areas and specific gear types, but there has been harvest limits and quota measurements in place for a long time. Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, compared to the people that are working now versus working then, were they catching more oysters per trip than they are now to have that increase in catch, or?
Probably in some years, yes, and in some years, no. I think back then, and again, I don't have the exact bushel limits on hand, but the condition of the resource was more of a limiting factor than the lengths of the season. So they were using less efficient gear types. So if the resource was good, they were likely catching more oysters. And today, the restrictions on the length of the season and those vessel limits are what are dictating harvest. So back then, it was more resource-driven than regulatory-driven, if that helps answer your question.
There's also a lot more oystermen back then, too.
True.
400 tongboats back then in James River. 400. There ain't that many boats out there altogether now. Any more questions? Mrs. Callum?
Andrew, when you mentioned the potential increase in transfers, 7 to 14%, did you take into account the licenses that roll off every year for the oyster user fees not being paid and those which would no longer participate in the industry?
I guess, so in terms of that effort, many of the user fees that aren't being renewed every year, I guess I'll put this slide up there to show you the number of, since 2018 roughly, the number of active participants has been right around that 400 number. So even though the number of individuals paying that user fee is going down, the number of people actually using their user fee has stayed relatively stable. So we might be losing user fees, but not in every case, but in many cases, some of those user fee holders that we're losing may not have actually been participating in the fishery, just paying into the replenishment fund.
Follow up?
Yes, ma'am.
So what is that percentage been the past couple of years of the roll-offs?
It's been in, well, you can see sort of the high point there, right around 1,100, but roughly 20 to 30 folks a year have not been renewing that user fee.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Mr. Erskine?
I had a question, I guess, between SMAC and staff. You put up the difference of the comparison. During the SMAC meeting, were those differences highlighted at that time and resolved, or how was that worked out at SMAC?
I think there was some discussion, but at that point, staff didn't have that full recommendation formulated to vet at SMAC. We wanted to take into account many of the SMAC recommendations and look at the season in totality. So I guess partially it would be your answer, but not a direct comparison at that SMAC meeting between what was presented as the staff recommendation and the SMAC recommendation today.
just as a quick follow-up, was it a full attendance at SMAC, and was it unanimous in terms of their recommendation, I guess, or what was agreed upon at that time?
Right, not all committee members were present, so I think it was 8 committee members were present. There's 13 on the committee, and at that time, the SMAC recommendation was unanimous, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Before, I'm gonna turn this over to Mr. Minor real quick. I gotta step out. I'll be right back. Go ahead, Mr. Headley.
I didn't see, maybe you said it, but I didn't see it, and if I didn't, I'm sorry for that. Is there gonna be another meeting, SMAC, between SMAC and staff at a later time in the season to potentially look at maybe extensions or closures, or how the season is going within reason, so they could actually maybe get an extension if it was warranted?
Yes, both the committee voted again unanimously, and staff will make every effort to have a meeting the second week in January to do just what you described there, look at the more recent harvest data, the more recent survey data, and make a determination on potential extensions or closures.
Any more questions?
Comparing the two charts, or staff's chart and SMAC's chart, I see that in the end of December, or the last 2 weeks of December, there is not a hand scrape area open in the Rappahannock. Is there a reason for that, considering that is probably 2 of the most demanding weeks of the whole season?
I think there is. It's Area 6 there. So Area 6 in the Rappahannock would be open that month. The SMAC recommendation was to have that area closed with just Area 7 open. So, so right here was the SMAC recommendation. I think we're talking about here. That's splitting Area 7 rather than having it as a standalone season in December, having Area 6 open congruently as well, with Area 7 covering that early holiday December market requested by SMAC there.
Just a follow-up, but is Area 6 usually a high-producing rock, or excuse me, area?
It's one of the smaller areas, so generally it does not produce the same number of oysters as other areas in the Rappahannock. We have replenished it. It has seen some seed planting. Again, it would have, the first 2 weeks would overlap with other harvest areas. And again, the first 2 weeks when it was open would overlap with the middle ground area there. So it shouldn't have, in theory, the level of effort if it was a standalone area that it would see. So likely it's only going to have been open at that point when it's open by itself as a standalone area for 2 weeks, and we would anticipate that it would be able to produce oysters still after 2 weeks of that harvest.
Thank you.
Mr. Erskine.
I have a question, Andrew, about the patent tong. The staff recommendation clearly has more patent tong gear being used during the season. And I guess my question is, how many licenses do we have in Virginia on that? Have we seen an increase? Because I'm just concerned in November and December that there would be more gear being worked, according to staff, using patent tong, and that might not support November and December's peak season.
I guess there's those areas in December and January are open to, anyone can switch gear types, I guess, but we have seen an increase in the number of participants in the patent tong fishery, and people don't have to go patent tonging, I guess, so they could still choose to fish in that hand scrape area if the patent tong areas weren't covering demand or they weren't catching their limits in these areas. Again, in December, you'd mentioned, was it not having enough product available with that gear type? Was that the concern, or?
Not necessarily having enough product, but the gear type being able to support. It's important to have hand scrape and dredge areas open for the volume that's needed in the fishery in November and December. Whereas patent tong can't get that sheer volume, and then added onto the number of licenses, certainly aren't what it is in hand scrape and dredge.
Right. No, we have seen that increased effort, and I guess, I think the staff recommendation is to have that as an additional option to allow that effort to be spread out. Again, there would still be hand scrape areas open in the James River, the Rappahannock River, and the Great Wacomico in December, as well as the York, new areas in the Rappahannock, as well as new areas in Beasley Bay, Tangier, California. So we have multiple areas open to multiple gear types, which is, I think, it's both staff's and SMAC's recommendation is to have as many areas open concurrently to spread out that effort between both gear types, but also to have good areas coming online to cover that peak demand, particularly in November and December. Okay. And again, there might be differences between SMAC and staff sort of minorly to make that recommendation, but I think in totality, the intent is to provide both stability in the fishery and stability in market conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Mr. Hadley?
The difference in, do you see any difference in the quality of the oysters between a patent tong rock and a hand scrape rock as far as the size, the marketability, or any of that? Is there a difference?
What we see on our survey, and I'll try to put this in, and some oyster shuckers will likely disagree, but what we see on the survey in some of the patent tong areas is the percentage of quote-unquote marketable oysters is lower. So you might have 20 oysters that are market-sized, and maybe 10 of them are what would be considered pretty oysters or easily shucked oysters in that area. Whereas in a hand scrape area, you might have half as many oysters. So you might have 5 or 10 oysters that are market-sized, but 80% of them are going to be pretty. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but there's just as many or more marketable oysters in the patent tong areas, but there's a lot more market-sized oysters that you'd have to cull through. We are planning on looking at that, addressing that issue this fall. We have a meeting scheduled with VIMS to look at that do some shucking experiments to look at that. Based on past data of dry meat weight and length, which you're looking at there, these again are lower edge, so in the patent tong areas, in the Rappahannock, Deep Rock, which is a patent tong area in the Chesapeake Bay, and Big Wicks, which is in the upper Rappahannock. Again, you can see they're similar size oysters here, and their meat weights, again, you're looking at margin errors, or error bars there. You're looking at basically, they're statistically almost, you can't tell them apart when you're actually looking at comparable sized oysters, at least in this. And again, we'll have more information on that, but I hope that answers your question, that there's a higher, likely, in sort of unscientific terms, a higher percentage of marketable oysters, but there's not necessarily more. You might have to spend twice as much time culling through it to get a comparable bushel that shucks similar, but based on the science that we have, I guess the answer would be no.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Button? Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this matter on the public oyster harvest season? In support or in opposition to the season, or got any comments to add to this? Ms. Lifford, come forward, please. Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Beverly Ludford, and I'm with Pleasure House Oysters. I sit on the SMAC committee and also on the AMAC committee, both dealing with oyster management advisory groups. I wanted to comment that, I don't know how you can put this in the minutes, but whew, I guess it's WHEW. The committee represents all aspects of the oyster and clam industry, I think, and of the fishery, and they're an amazing group of people who spend a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of meetings and a tremendous amount of research and thought, compromise, and argument to make recommendations to this commission. The issues that you all know, but I'd like to share with the public through this medium, that we consider are the resource itself through surveys, harvest, effort, market, science, looking at other agencies and other educational and scientific groups that have input. The meetings are well attended, not just by the committee members, but by a lot of people who come to have input into the deliberations. We consider the watermen, the trip times, the landings, the seasons. We can't consider the weather because that's not predictable, but we look at history. We look at other fishery opportunities because we like for watermen to be able to feed their families year-round, not just during certain months. And the families appreciate that. We look at the market, the effort, the economic impact, because we know that that's a very important thing. We want to have domestic seafood. We want to have Virginia oysters. We don't want to have oysters from other places. We want to have a market of our own in Virginia. We look at conservation measures because we have the future to think about. I'm a multi-generational waterman myself. I work on the water. I was out there 3 days last week. Usually people don't think when they look at me that's possible, but it is. I have pictures to prove it. We look at the rotational plan. We look at the historical data. We look at the projections. We recognize staff diligence, and we appreciate it. The staff are amazing in this arena. Their commitment, both the committee members and the staff, their commitment and their sacrifice. Many of the committee members are not at work when they're sitting. We start our meetings at 4. You wouldn't like that, I don't think. And it helps with the Bay Bridge Tunnel for me, because by the time we're finished, everybody's gone home and half of them are in bed. I encourage you to accept the recommendations that have been, I think, a compromise between the committee and the staff. And we also are very concerned, and we have been meeting more, that we meet again in January to revisit these things, because so much can happen in our world today in just a few months. We don't want to think like that, but when you look around the world today, it's obvious that we can't predict what will happen. But we want people to enjoy Virginia oysters and clams. We want watermen to continue in their craft, and we want to bring new ones on board. I have my son and my 3 grandsons who, in fact, my son's on the water as we speak. So I guess I'm a selfish interest, but if you have any questions from a committee member, I'm here. And I thank you for your consideration, and I appreciate being part of this committee and being able to serve.
Thank you for your time for serving, too. Appreciate it. Ms. Ledford's on a whole lot more than just one committee. I seen her at a meeting last week. I just popped in, so she participates well. Any questions for Ms. Ledford from the commission? Thank you. Mr. Moore, how are you?
Good. How are you?
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please
Thank you
state your
very
name
much.
for the record.
Chris Moore, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm actually filling in a little bit today for my colleague Jackie Shannon, who is on SMAC as well. Unfortunately, couldn't be here today. But first of all, I just wanted to highlight, I think Commissioner Erskine hit the nail on the head. We should be really proud of where we are with this fishery. Getting to 700,000 bushels is a testament to the staff's work, to your work as a commission managing this resource and making sure we balance opportunities for our watermen with also good restoration and replenishment and conservation as well. As folks have already said, the staff recommendation really does try to balance the wishes of the industry with the need to ensure that we have a long-term healthy resource out in Chesapeake Bay and in the tributaries that provide all these oysters to us. In addition, that staff recommendation seeks to keep multiple areas open, so we're not having too many boats in one area, over-harvesting one area, things like that. I know another issue that's been brought up is the 2-week openings around the high harvest times. I think that was something the staff has really tried to work with industry on in order to allow our industry to catch oysters during that time of high need in the industry and make sure that we have the markets full like we want them to be. Also brought up in the staff recommendation was the part that, yes, we're voting on seasons today, but we also have a replenishment program that we need to be aware of, and we have somewhat limited resources to be able to replenish our areas that we're harvesting in the public fishery, and we want to make sure we don't get too out far in front on the harvest areas, not having sufficient replenishment dollars to make those areas profitable again. A couple things in closing. One, kind of pointing to that 700,000 bushel season we've had. In the James River alone, we had a 13-week season just a couple years ago. We're now at 22 weeks. I think that's a success all the way around, and we should be proud of that and think about that extension that we're seeing there. We've also been benefiting the last couple of years from some of the best spat sets probably any of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. We'd like those to continue. We know they probably won't every year, but they have been really good, and we want to make sure that we prepare a little bit for maybe not having such great spat sets in the future. So again, I think the staff has done a great job compromising, a lot of work with SMAC. I hope you'll support the staff recommendation. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Mr. Headley?
Thank you. You said your colleague Jackie Shannon?
Yes.
Was she at the SMAC meeting?
She was not. She was on the vacation that day, so she couldn't be there. But luckily, we've had some really good conversations with staff and also with some other members of the SMAC and folks in the industry since then to work on these different issues. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you, Chris. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on the oyster? Mr. Johnson? These are all committee members, it seems like. Please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name for the record.
My name's Ben Johnson. I'm here on behalf, I agreed to be a liaison with the SMAC committee to discuss our findings and where we came up with our findings. And Ms. Ludford, I guess, stole some of my introduction, which is fine. But to give a brief comparison and some numbers of the two seasons, as far as effort, it was reported earlier to the SMAC committee this year that there were 673 user fees available in 2022. 280 of them were active. That's out of my notes that was reported. As far as the SMAC season that was presented, that gives us 110 working days between hand scrape, pat and tong, and dredge. And out of that, with the 8 bushel limit, we're looking at roughly 271,000 bushels, which is a mark less than we aimed for or than we achieved last year. And if you take that over to staff's recommendation, they propose a 99 working day season for those 3 fisheries combined. And with those 280 active people, even if you figure a 10% increase in the number of active people, you're looking at 244,000 bushels is the mark that would be achieved. And as a personal opinion outside of the committee, for everything else to be going up to set a mark below what we achieved last year seems a little foolish, I guess, for lack of a better word. Something else real quick in those numbers let's see here. There's a difference between the two before the 10% increase in effort of just shy of 25,000 bushels, and with the 10% increase, just over 27,000 bushels. That at the standard 280 where we were last year, that's $3,520 extra per waterman that worked, or roughly right at $1 million to the industry economy, however. And if you put the economic multiplier that is used throughout the oyster industry has been of 2.6, it puts $2.5 million throughout the Virginia economy, which is surprisingly close to the replenishment budget that we ask for every year to maintain this fishery. To go into a quick where our reasons came from for the seasons, in James River, we had the ask of, Andrew, could you actually put that slide up? It would.
Give you some more room to work with.
I'm good, thank you. We asked that Area 3 be shifted and not open till November 1st and carry 2 weeks into March to give something in March, as well as then still have something in October, as the industry needs both oysters in both ends of that market, it's still, in those areas, is a 22-week season. It's not a 24-week season in James River. It splits the river in half and makes it 22 weeks in the upper end, 22 weeks in the lower end. James River received the lion's share of shells last year from the replenishment program. They received 180,000 bushels. And it's had less, as was said earlier by Andrew, it's had less effort historically over the last few years. It can sustain the extra effort and be a benefit for the watermen as well as the industry. The other one, our shift of California rock in Tangier, was something that was presented by Don Porter, a member of the SMAC committee. And that goes to a sociological reason that the watermen in Saxis are looking and needing something to do in the month of November. And I have actually two different charts, one showing it as this is the 2 weeks and one showing it as the full month. I would have to say I don't remember exactly where that left the committee. Well, like I say, one was sent out the day after the meeting, and then this one was presented as it was presented to staff. Anyway. Either way, they're asking for something in the month of month of November for the watermen, the 30-some watermen I think he mentioned in the Saxis area. Because the main reason that travel, as everyone knows, is not with fuel prices, the rest is an expensive and not economically feasible idea to do traveling across the bay to work. Let's see. Rappahannock, the SMAC proposed a 99-day season versus the staff's 78-day season. We left everything spread equally across areas with no area being open for more than a month, excluding Area 6, which was to be reviewed in that January meeting and an assessment made and a decision of keep it open or it's been overworked, too worked, and close it. But it was done that way so that with that January meeting, the things that we wanted to review and look at would not have to come before the commission as they have in the past as an emergency regulation. It could be something put out for public hearing and accomplished that way versus in a hurry. The last that I have was York River with that hand scrape area in Area 1 of York River. It was brought to our attention by shaft tongers, actually, that they were looking for some help with breaking up the bottom, cleaning up the bottom to make the product they were harvesting more marketable and better for them. We agreed on a month, and I believe as a committee, if I remember correctly, supported a month with that. Let's see. And that's about all I have, other than one question after looking at the information that I found about this meeting with the Shellfish Management Division evaluation as of 8/22/23 online this morning. And the 4 VAC 27/2040, which is what we're debating how we're going to amend and change. The staff recommendation that's on the TV there in front of us does not match Table 1 for the clean cull harvest area in this, if it's noticed. And not to make more discussion, but what's here to be approved in that is a lot different than what you find on the board there. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Johnson from the commission? Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anyone else in the public wish to speak on this matter? Come forward, Mr. Kellum. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do, sir.
Please state your name for the record and the microphone.
Tommy Kellum, Kellum Oyster Company. I'm a 20-year member of Shellfish Management Committee. First off, Mr. Commissioner, before I start, the introduction of Kirsten, I'd like to give a little background. Her indoctrination was to come in and do a full audit on the shellfish records of Kellum Oyster Company for 8 months, which she had I would say, file boxes that were probably 24 inches by 12 inches by 14 inches. I don't know, 6 or 8 of those, and she very diligently went through those and did an awesome job. She did a very professional job, and so her welcoming on my end was probably a little different than it was for staff. But
Well, unfortunately for Pat, she's now over with Randy in Habitat.
Do a good job, you get to work for him.
I would agree that that's an unfortunate. So welcome. I'm not going to belabor the conversation on SMAC. Anyone that knows me and has heard me speak before the commission before knows, I hope would know my commitment to this resource, to the culture, the social aspects, our partners in the environmental community, our partners at VIMS. My background goes back to the days in the early 90s when Mr. Moore's predecessors at CBF, myself, Mr. Lake Coward, Dr. Roger Mann, we drove miles and miles begging for $200,000-$300,000 to get this industry jump-started. And I laid out, I've got them with me, I've got 22 years worth of files back here that I laid out yesterday in preparation with this, and got a little emotional watching that much of my life in the floor and the friendships and the just everything that's come through that. But I think it speaks more to Associate Commissioner Erskine's comments, just how far we've come, and you know, let's pat everyone on the back. We've really been fortunate. The good Lord has blessed us, but our management strategies have gotten us in a good position. I'm going to be frank on my opinions of where we're at regarding staff's recommendations. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we've had some conversation about the patent tong and other gear types. SMAC has been told more by staff what these gear types do for the fishery and how we're going to accept it than SMAC has agreed and pushed forward. I think it's merit in all of this, but I don't agree that it's been a collaboration of sorts. Going back to the slide, I'm not going to elaborate on SMAC's recommendations and so forth, but you know, it's kind of contradictory. You heard from staff here a little bit earlier that we're spreading these things out and we don't want over effort in any area. The Rappahannock, which is my hometown, I have grave concerns about Area 6 being open for 2 months. Area 6 was originally paired with Area 1, which is one of the workhorse best areas in the Rappahannock River. It was part of the rotational management strategy that was put together with industry. Dr. Roger Mann was a big proponent, had a lot of input in that. Area 1 was taken away from the hand scrape fishery and set aside specifically as patent tong, and when it did so, it ruined that rotation. Area 1 is no longer on the table, so we've got Area 6, which was originally paired with 1 because it was not a high producing area, so that we had sort of equilibrium. The staff recommendation to have that open for 2 months, a recommendation that I actually made at SMAC was, let's open it for 1 month. Let's come back in January and let's reevaluate where we're at on this. And it may be that, you know, we make a decision to open it and give the commissioner the ability to come back like he did this past year and say, we need to close this. I don't think putting that out there for 2 months open-ended is a good idea. Secondly, probably the thing that I have the biggest issue and what we've had the most discussion here is the market frame and so forth. Taking Area 7 out the last 2 weeks of December is ludicrous. Area 7 provides the highest quality, meat quality and appearance marketable oyster, in my opinion, in Chesapeake Bay. Commissioner Erskine can speak to it. We have customers that rave over the quality of that oyster. to leave Area 6 open for 2 weeks standalone makes no sense from a conservation reason, and sliding Area 7 over into Area 8 makes no sense from a marketability. And I have grave concerns for the industry of what we're going to do for oysters that 2 weeks before Christmas. I agree with staff on the 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, the way the market works. Typically, Thanksgiving is a lot of Midwest, out-of-state product. We buy that, process that, get that on the road, whereas with Christmas and having a spouse that's a commissioner, she could attest, it's right up until about 12 o'clock on Christmas Eve, getting orders together and getting them out. So it's important to have resource to the end. Commissioner Lush, you've probably been through that same situation. But if our strategy moving forward is going to be to go to less efficient gear types and to kind of put things on cruise control and just sort of hope for the best that we don't age out our fishery population and so forth, I think I've probably outlived my usefulness of where we're heading. If we're just going to go to a 40, 50 boat fleet and we're just going to reduce this fishery down to a point that it's just status quo and we do a little replenishment and it's taking care of itself, that's not the vision of what I signed up for 27 years ago. And I don't think it's what all of the legislators, we had one in the room here I saw that have committed to this fishery, the amount of dollars and investment, their willingness to come out and see our plants, the tax revenue that they take an oath to uphold. I don't think that was the vision at that time. But I've gotten long-winded. I apologize. And lastly, I'd like to thank Commissioner Green, the entire staff for the new apprenticeship program. Sustainability to me is resource foremost, and right up there with it is the oysterman and the culture that I had the privilege of growing up to know, and I applaud this apprenticeship program. I think it's a huge step in that direction, and I know it's a lot of work for a lot of folks in this room, and I appreciate that.
Yes, any questions? Mr. Minor?
Yes. Mr. Kellum, thank you for all you've done and you being here as well. With staff recommendation, how would that affect the industry? How would that affect the watermen? What would that look like?
So the staff recommendation does not take into consideration the front end and back end of the season. And where the watermen are, you know, we see all of this gray up there in the hand tong area. We've got some excellent younger hand tongers in the state of Virginia, but it's a small part of the fishery. We've got one in here, probably one of the best in the state of Virginia. So, I mean, there's things for them to do, but when you look at that March and the way SMAC had looked at, it was portrayed that we wanted to extend the season. We didn't want to extend it. We just wanted to slide some areas down to give areas that would be open in March an opportunity for watermen to work. But if you look at that March time frame, Commissioner Headley knows better than I, but crabbing's not normally awesome in March. If you're a patent tonger, a dredger, a hand scraper, what do you do in the month of March? So to answer your question, it's the SMAC recommendation spreads it out. And honestly, marketability is very strong in March because you're at the end of the season. A lot of states have dwindled their resources down. And what it does for a processor like myself or a company like Commissioner Erskine's involved in, I'm beholden to go to Maryland in early October and beg someone from oysters there because I've got a plant to run. I got customers that want product. I got employees that I've got to pay. So I do that. Well, then Virginia opens, and anyone that knows me knows my allegiance to the watermen of Virginia. So I back off on my guy in Maryland, and he's all upset saying, well, I was there for you in October when y'all didn't have any oysters. Now, you know, you want me. So we go through that, and then we get to March. I've still got customers and I've still got employees and very little product available. And then I call that guy back up and he says, "You've got to be kidding me. You just, you haven't bought from me since October and now you want." So it creates a lot of job concerns in that aspect. But for the waterman, SMAC sort of gives work throughout the season. But, the York River we're talking about, we're making it sound like we're taking a hand-tong area and giving some scrape effort. We took a scrape area that was in rotational harvest that was part of the rotational plan setup. We've already taken a portion of it out and set it aside for hand-tonging. Now we're taking more out, and it's being portrayed that we're taking it away and giving it a little bit of scraping. No, we took a scrape area away. I've got a file from 2016. We put 68,000 bushels of shell up there. So the notion that we can't replenish this, I don't completely buy into that. But I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but there's a lot of implications on the water.
Your memory's well. You remember 2016, so.
I just read it. I'm not that sharp.
Mr. Headley.
Thank you, Mr. Cullum. Your family has been in this industry since probably the mid-1900s. Do you, well, maybe not you, but does your family know the 70s limits as far as like what the reason there was so much oyster harvest back then?
Yeah, my family, my great-great-grandfather moved from Crisfield, Maryland to the Rappahannock River to start oystering in the early 1900s. The 1970s was a really, it was a great time for our family and the industry. I wouldn't completely agree with staff's answers to your question about the limits. The limit was, if you could afford to buy an oyster license, there were no waterman's cards or any, and I'm not agreeing that this was the right thing to do, I'm just answering your question.
Yes, sir.
There were no, you went to the Marine Resources office, you bought your license. If you had 2 people, they put a little star on your license plate, and you went to work. The limit was, for patent tonging on the Rappahannock, was what you could catch in the legal hours. Typically, the buyers put a cutoff time of about 3 o'clock on it because they had started at 3 in the morning and they didn't want to be there till midnight. My first job, when I was old enough and big enough to do it, was to roll a wheelbarrow from the boats in the 70s after we got off school into the plant with the oysters. It was typical for a boat to have 50 to 60 bushels, and you would wonder if you were ever going to finish. So I wouldn't agree that we had 16 bushel limits. And to the commissioner's point, the boats were just endless. You would look at the mouth of Carter's Creek and you would just see them coming. And I remember in 1986 calling my dad and, to check. We had a payphone in the cafeteria at school, and that was the summer that MSX and Dermo had showed up in the Rappahannock. And boats were in at 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning with 6 and 8 bushels, which was nothing at that time, and just couldn't do it. And the last oyster from the Rappahannock was bought at our dock on Thanksgiving Day, 1987. And it was 1996 before any oysters came in again. They were private, and it was 2004 before we had any measurable. So I lived through a lot of that, and it was some pretty tough times.
I actually have one more question.
Go ahead, Mr. Headley. We're going down memory lane again.
Yes. Kinda. No. The quality of the oysters from a patent tong rock and a hand scrape rock, I asked Andrew, got his opinion. You being the processor, I'd like to have yours.
I would agree with staff on the his synopsis of the marketability size-wise as far as the oysters, and he's right. They grow quickly there, and the watermen, they're market size, but they're not necessarily marketable. But our biggest concern, and what we heard from every processor on SMAC, was the meat quality. And we can get a meat assessment from VIMS. My meat assessment comes from my yield and my, what our economic value is. And it's gotten to the point if, if Commissioner Erskine's company needs Rappahannock oysters and I give him a menu of what he needs, no one wants Deep Rock oysters in November, December, January. The meat quality is just not there. Regardless of what the science is, I'm telling you, they're terrible. Someone would say, why do you buy them? I buy them because I have a relationship with those harvesters that I uphold, and we argue amongst ourselves and figure out where we're going to move those oysters. But the meat quality is not there.
Okay, thank you. I would say, doing surveys, I am the nexus to industry. The only oysters that I'm aware of that got tossed in the trash because the demand's been so high that couldn't sell were patent tong oysters. Last year.
Frozen patent tong, that's correct.
That's it. The only ones that couldn't sell.
Thankfully, it wasn't me.
Any more questions? No, thank you. Well, you took me down memory lane quite a bit. I remember working with my great-grandfather 40 years ago. I wasn't really working, I was just watching. And he would look at his watch. I think the tong limit back then, the time limit was 3 o'clock, and it was like 10 minutes to 3. And he said, well, we'll go along in a minute. And I was like, we just will finish the day out. Ain't no need to quit 10 minutes early. So, but they worked the day out back then. A lot of them did. So, and there wasn't a limit. So, anyways, anybody else out there want to speak? Come on, Mrs. Husky, come please.
I hate to follow that.
I know, right? Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Kim Husky, Cherrystone Aqua Farms on the Eastern Shore. We also actively work our private grounds in the James River, and that's why I'm here, is actually to support my colleagues in the public oyster fishery, private oyster fishery. But I do have two comments, and Mr. Kellum gave me a great segue, and that is that Cherrystone Aqua Farms really does not believe that we should not support any decisions that require the use of patent tongs on any ground, honestly. Over the years, our private grounds have had better production, and I think that was seen in staff's videos than public grounds, and we've been using dredges on those private grounds for years. Staff's desire to require the use of patent tongs is not based on any good science and actually increases the cost for already struggling watermen and businesses. So I think there's been a lot of talk about patent tongs today. We just wanted to give our 2 cents on the issue. Can't speak any more eloquently than my predecessor, but we would also like to go on record that there will be an SMAC meeting in January, and we would like to actually see it followed up by a full commission meeting to talk about the extension in the James River.
Ms. Husky.
Yes, sir.
I will make a comment on that in just a few minutes. Still be an SMAC meeting. You better believe that. But it
Excellent.
may be before January.
Excellent.
So,
That would be even better.
We can't make a decision January and respond by February. It takes too long. So we will have that discussion internally, and I will reach out myself personally to SMAC.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. That's all. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Ms. Husky? That being said, is there anyone else out there? Come on, Mr. Hudgens. We got the all-star cast of committee members over the chairs. I mean, I like your garb. It's not like you're going to a commission meeting. You're on vacation. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name for the record.
J.C. Hudgens. Good morning, Commissioner, Associate Commissioners. I'm Chairman of the SMAC Committee and also President of the Virginia Watermen's Association. But I'm here today to talk to you as a waterman, as a working waterman, not as Chairman of the SMAC Committee. I think Ms. Ludford done a wonderful job with that. We do have a great committee. I won't get into that, but we all work together good with staff, and I think I think we had a good proposal this year, and I'll speak a little bit about that later. But what I'm actually would like to concentrate on is the Rappahannock River. Being a working waterman and participating in the hand scrape and the patent tong fishery myself both, I'm deeply concerned about the rotation, the way staff has set up the Rappahannock River. And if you look at it, if you compare Chart 1 to Chart 2, SMAC to staff, essentially, we only have a 3-month season in the Rappahannock River. We're looking at November, December, and January. And I'm speaking only of the Rappahannock. We do have a 2-week season in Area 4, which was good. But from a waterman's perspective, you can't base your income and base your work off of a 3-month season. You really need the 5 months. So I think it's imperative that we look at SMAC recommendations, which did cover this particular item. And I think we need to we're also accomplishing what myself and what the committee is interested in doing. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to, to have shorter multiple openings, which would allow watermen to disperse and go to different areas, whether it be in Tangier, whether it be in Rappahannock, whether it be in the Great Wacomico or the James River. And I think SMAC recommendations does a better job of doing that as opposed to staff's recommendation. If you look at March, of course we don't have anything in March. What are the watermen going to do in March? You can't sell a crab pot till March 16th. That's 2 weeks. What are we supposed to do? And you also look at February. Of course, you have blackberry hang, but in the Rappahannock, you don't have anything but a patent tong, which I'm fortunate. A lot of people. I mean, Andrew says you can convert and jump from one fishery to the other. You can't do it. If you have a big boat and you're set up for patent tong, you can patent tong. You can convert over and go into hand scrape. If you have a small boat, you cannot convert a small boat from hand scrape to go into patent tong. So please remember that. And we're looking at 25 to 30 people participating in the patent tong fishery, maybe out of 75 licensed people to do it. And when Area 2 was open last year, we did see some crossover. Watermen are like a lot of people when it comes to making money. If they can make their money in 2 hours instead of 3 hours, wouldn't you do it? Would you try to shorten your workday? And that's what watermen tend to do. So that's why sometimes they'll leave the patent tong fishery and go to the hand scrape fishery. So I guess what I'd like for y'all to do is to seriously consider SMAC's recommendation. It was a unanimous recommendation over all parts of the industry. We have hand tongers, we have hand scrapers, we have patent tongers, we have aquaculture. It's a very broad spectrum of what Virginia needs to see on a committee. And I'm proud to be chairman of this committee. And I think, if we could work a little closer with staff, I think sometimes some of this stuff was brought up. I ask for discussion at the end of every motion that we make, and I like to see staff participate more in the discussion side of it. I think some things are looked at later down the line, and they're actually changed. So very concerned about that. I think it should be brought up in SMAC. So appreciate your time. That's all I got. Got any questions, I'll be glad to answer it.
Mr. Branson?
Yes. Hey, Kev. The difference one obvious difference to me is what the staff recommends regarding Larson's Bay, what the SMAC didn't. What is your thoughts on that, patent tonging over a 3-month period instead of 1 month in Larson's Bay?
That was a plus change. I'll add to that. SMAC did recommend 2 months. They cut it to 1 when we approved it. And this is an area.
SMAC did.
SMAC, right. And since this staff recommendation came to y'all, he has that at 3 months in, which is greatly appreciated. I mean, the watermen, I think we don't know what's there. We haven't been allowed to work it since 1999, so I guess it's kind of an unknown, and maybe we'll see how it works out.
Not many people are going to roll the dice during November, December when they need oysters. You're not going to take a chance on the area that you don't know what's there.
The main reason the watermen push for it is January and February is your worst months for weather. On the north side of the river, on the Lancaster side, January and February is all your northwest, your northeast winds. And this particular area has a hookup in it, so it protects you from the northwest winds, where the normal Rappahannock River does not protect you. It blows straight down the river. So that was our thoughts looking at that as far as in January and February. It is a good area, I think. Hopefully, we'll take a look at it and see how it works out. and we'll get back together the second week in January. Hopefully, we can come up with some solution to March,
Maybe sooner.
maybe sooner. I'm willing any time. I mean, I took off a day today to come down here. I lost money just like a lot of people do, you know, so because I'm very passionate about fisheries management, and very passionate about keeping the watermen working, and because we have livelihood, we have families to feed. Everybody benefits from that, not only us, but the state.
Mr. Branson has a follow-up
And
question.
my second question is about York Area 1, the hand scrape versus hand tong. The staff recommends splitting it, hand scrape, hand tong. If you could recap recover the discussion at SMAC regarding hand scraping in the month of November. That was the SMAC recommendation.
well,
The
SMAC
benefit to that recommendation.
Well, it was no recommendation at first, and we discussed it, and a motion was made by one of the hand tongers there. We talked it over with him during public comment, and it wasn't any set aside for hand scrape. Then we agreed, motion was passed for 1 month season now. Staff has now cut that to 2 weeks. And like Mr. Kellum said, that was always originally in a regular rotation. You know, it's just like the York River, everything's gone to hand tong. We got 12 or 15 boats that are hand tonging. Now, you can't support a fishery on a small amount of boats like that. It ain't like it used to be. This guy is unbelievable. I mean, he's one of the very few that goes out there and does it every day. You know, the average person does not want to hand tong. I can tell you that. It's a cheap fishery to get into because you buy a set of hand tong, you stand in a skiff, and you go to work. So
Very vulnerable to the weather, too.
very vulnerable to the weather.
Ms. Callum.
Mr. Johnson spoke about Tangier needing work in November, and he was unsure what SMAC's final thought, whether that should have been the full month of November or half of November. Do you know?
It was. I think SMAC did recommend a month. I know Don Porter brought it up. There was some discussion between Dan.
I can speak,
Okay.
just for the record there, I did speak with Don Porter and Dan Dice on that 2-week season there, and that was their recommendation. It was a little unclear,
okay.
so just,
All right.
I did speak with them on the phone after.
Okay.
after being cleared.
I know it was a lively discussion between Mr. Diaz and Mr. Porter on this, you know, because the Tangier-men, they normally crab into December, you know, but the Saxes guys needed something to be able to work in November, and that was SMAC's reason for the recommendation on that.
Mr. Hadley.
Thank you, J.C. With Larson's Bay, how come, or was there any discussion whether it should be patent tong or hand scrape, or was it just strictly you're going to patent tong it?
It was strictly patent tong. It was never discussed as hand scrape. Yep.
What do you think it would be a better alternative?
Well, I don't know. I don't have any history there. I never worked there, you know. My friend and compadre, Mr. George, he's very familiar with the area. I was hoping he could be here today, but he had surgery and couldn't make it. And I just know what I hear from him, you know. So I think, you know, barring that we only have one particular area in the Rappahannock for patent tonging, you know, I guess that was a reason for it. And I don't know depth-wise, like I said, I've never worked at, would be a ground where hand scraping would be in an efficient way, you know. Okay.
Any more questions, sir? Mr. Reed? Thank you, J.C. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Anyone else wish to speak on this matter? Come on forward, Mr. Hutt. Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name for the record, please.
My name is Mike Hutt, and some of y'all know I'm Executive Director of the Virginia Marine Products Board, where we promote and market seafood for the industry. And as listening to these comments today about rotation and this and that, that's up to management and staff and the SMAC committee. But from a marketing standpoint of view, the biggest demand for Virginia oysters, which has come back in Virginia, is in the oyster business. Thanks to previous commissions, and you all's commissions, and staff and scientists, we're back in it. I saw the days in the 60s and 70s, growing up on the water in Northern Neck, we was buy boats, we had oysters, we lost oysters, it's come back. And I'm proud to say we are in the oyster business. And people come to Virginia looking for oysters. We had more demand for oysters through our office this past year, and we've had in the 24 years I've been there. But we have oysters, and that's why they're coming. But to see part of this closed in November, December for 2 weeks here and there, when there's the biggest demand for shucked oysters from Virginia, I think is going to be adherent to what we've built up and are known for now of having a good quality oyster, good demand. It gives the waterman work and income, and from them to the fuel, to the trucking, the boxing, packaging companies, it's a big plus for the Commonwealth to have that industry going then and strong when the demand is stronger then than any other time of the year. It has grown into be a year-round shucking business in Virginia, but we didn't have years ago. And if you start losing part of that and they're going somewhere else, if they can get to oysters, they're going to remember that. As some have previously said, you don't call me in October, and after that, you come back in March, we lose that. But to what Virginia has built in the industry we have, and as strong as we are, and the growth we have going in it, I'd hate to see 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, when you can add it in the front, carry it to the back. But from a marketing standpoint of view, I think that we need to leave that going to have oysters for the biggest demand and strongest time of the year for demand. And I'll be glad to answer any questions if anybody has those.
Any questions for Mr. Hunt? Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you for your time.
Anyone else wish to speak on oysters? Oyster regulation? All right. I'm not going to ask again. Matters before the commission. Commission operates on motions. Mr. Erskine.
I have a question for Andrew. Based on everything we've kind of heard, there seems to be just a few places of maybe disagreement between those two tables. Your first graph showed the increase overall in Virginia of the harvest season 2022 to 23, but it did not break it down by area or location, be it Rappahannock or specific areas. In your opinion, the SMAC table, if that were to be adopted, does that jeopardize the harvest or the oyster resource in the specific areas? And would you be concerned about specific areas?
I guess I might be able to pull up a slide that answers that question. But what we saw last year in particular was in the Rappahannock specifically, with the length of that season being what it was and the conditions, the resource, and the boats being where it was, and this is in layman's terms, roughly 40,000 more bushels came out of the Rappahannock rather than the James River. So I would assume that if the SMAC season were adopted, we would likely see something similar, where likely there would be less boats in the James River, particularly in February, and those boats, probably 60 boats, would be harvesting more oysters in the Rappahannock. You might have more boats end up staying in the Rappahannock rather than the James River. So basically, it would shift effort to the Rappahannock. It would be based on last year's harvest there and away from the James, even though the James is open longer, which is one of the reasons why we allowed that. So I presume if you went with the staff recommendations, more oysters would be coming out of the James River and Patentong areas, whereas the SMAC recommendation, again, with Area 1 being Patentong right now, this is an Area 7 and 8 being open concurrently, that effort would shift there. And that is one thing to note here is Area 7 and 8 haven't been closed. They aren't really on a rotation necessarily, but they've been open for the last, it'd be the third year in a row, and they've been producing lots of oysters. But again, that would basically shift effort, particularly in that month of February, likely to the James River.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hadley.
I got a question kind of towards what Mr. Erskine asked. But you say that that could possibly shift effort from James River to the Rappahannock. That being said, could that be because the Rappahannock has been booming the last 10 years with the way that the management has been going?
There's definitely more oysters in the Rappahannock than there has been in recent memory there. So yes, there are more oysters there to catch and more effort as well. Yep.
Ms. Kellum?
Just a comment. I think it's important to realize also that last oyster season on the Rappahannock, the boats were in with their limit before 10 on the last day of the season. I just think it's important for everybody to realize that they're there.
Yeah, I was discussing this earlier in the week about, or earlier last week, and when they started the scraping efforts, I can't remember the exact year. I want to say it was 96, something like that. It took almost all day to get your limit on these same areas we're talking about at the beginning of the season. By the end of the season, you worked all day and you didn't get it all. So it was kind of unique to see where we've came with the same gear in the same exact spot where they get their limit in the same amount of time from start to finish. Because it was a struggle in the 90s when they first, I want to say it was 96, 97, but I'm close, whatever it was. I know Jones and Short was first. That's the only thing I remember, but yes, you were pulling by. Mr. Headley.
Is there any way we could get Mr. Kellum to come back up?
Sure, if he's here. Mr.
I have
Kellum,
a question for him.
we go. State your name. You already sworn in. State your name for the record.
Tom Kellum, Kellum Seafood.
Thank you. This question is regards to Area 7. That being closed the last half of December, how would that affect the industry for the last half of December?
It would be detrimental on the shucking side. You sort of have to understand the dynamics of what you use. The James River oysters are typically for our half-shell customers. We will shuck them when we absolutely have to, but again, the meat quality is not of such that we prefer to shuck. So we try to spread the boats out. We have half-shell business year-round, and we have shucking business. But on the shucking side, it would be huge, and I feel very comfortable. I'd just like to state I would never recommend doing something that I think would harm us. I plan to hopefully be in this business for a lot more years. But to Commissioner Kellum's point, I take a lot of comfort in Area 7 when my truck was driving 45 miles to get the oysters and he was back at the plant by 11 a.m. on the last day of Area 7. I have a lot of comfort in what's there, the resource. So, but it would be huge. And to the comment of how many oysters were harvested in the Rappahannock, I absolutely agree with staff. You had the very best areas open in the Rappahannock last year. And Area 2, I think staff, we probably could agree on this. Area 2 outperformed any of our expectations. And again, we ended the season with limits caught by 10 o'clock. So I don't necessarily agree that, I absolutely do not agree that SMAC's recommendation is going to be a repeat of the performance we saw in the Rappahannock, because Area 6 is not going to produce like 2 or 4 did.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Tommy. That being said, matters still before the commission.
I'd just like to make a comment for my fellow members. I'm not, some of my limitations, although my family has been in oysters many years ago, is I tend to believe in the watermen. I know there's a difference between the staff recommendation and the SMAC recommendation, but when that happens, there's things I don't understand, and one of them is the level of effort in an area in terms of number of watermen working it and the gear type and its impact on that area, as well as the area size in general. But I tend to, side with what the watermen recommend, and that would be the SMAC recommendation, with an addition of the Larson's Bay opening as the staff recommended. It's an area, as Commissioner, you mentioned, hadn't been worked, I think, Andrew, 20 years, I think?
Yeah, it's a combination of a sanctuary and closed harvest.
So it's kind of an unknown area, but I'm sure some watermen may venture in there, but it's an option available to them. So that's kind of where I'm standing for my fellow members here.
So if you made that into a motion, it would be to?
I would make a recommendation to accept SMAC recommendation with the addition of Larson's Bay, Pat Tong, December through February.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Got a motion to, did you get that, Mrs. Hogg? Motion to take SMAC's recommendation but add
Larson's Bay, Patton Tong as staff would
as staff, which
recommend.
would be December, January,
December
February.
through February, I believe it is. Yes, December through February, Patton Tong and Larson's Bay.
So basically add December and February, because the SMAC already has it in
Oh,
January.
right.
Am I seeing that right, Andrew? 'Cause I
Trying to
can't
mentally
tell the
compare
column.
these, merge these two.
They already have it in January, it looks
Yeah,
like.
let me clarify there. So the SMAC recommendation for all the hand scrape dredge, including the March for Beasley's Bay, everything, plus the
In
2 extra
particular, the
months.
York Area 1 hand scrape in November, based on the comments from Mr. Johnson, I believe. Basically, I'm taking what staff recommended for Patton Tong, for Larson's Bay, and adding it to the SMAC recommendation.
So that includes, as seen, the extra weeks in the James River, the 4.5-month season for hand scrape, and the 4-month season for dredge as well. So everything gets those an extra month
Knowing
of
that,
harvest.
we're
on-
going to revisit
Gotcha.
this hopefully December-ish.
I mean, that's the one thing I could add is, I mean, adding Larson's Bay, to February, March, or whatever the March one, we have time for SMAC to meet again and do that. We don't have time probably for SMAC to do anything before October, but, I mean, I can imagine that we can probably get something together where SMAC probably November or December range, and so we can be ready for January potentially, to bring it back before the commission, and also have a stock assessment on how the grounds are doing, what it looks like. We'll know if we had any storms up to that point that could be devastating. So, yeah, we could absolutely revisit that. The only way to do it outside of an emergency, that's one thing I want to make it clear, is you can't meet the month before and it not be an emergency. It's not enough time, the way we have to advertise it, the way we have to go forward. So it'd have to be emergency if you meet the month before the commission meet. You have to meet 2 months before the commission meet, SMAC would, for us to have enough time to get it through the pipeline and get it on the agenda. So I have a motion and a second to accept SMAC recommendation with the addition of Patton Tong, Larson's Bay, December and February. Add it to-
December through February.
December through February. The addition of December and February, or it has January. So, that being said, is there any more discussion on that motion that's been seconded? Or any other discussion for that matter? That being said, care to vote? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That being said, motion carries. Thank you, Andrew. Next item, number 7, looks like Mr. Widgeon.
Good morning, Commissioner, Associate Commissioners. I'm Zach Widgeon. I'm the Director of Communications here at VMRC. This morning, I promise I'll be brief. I'm bringing a grant proposal for consideration from the Marine Fishing Improvement Fund. The Marine Fishing Improvement Fund consists of fees collected from the sale of commercial fishing licenses and is under the purview of the Commercial Fishing Advisory Board. And this may be administered by the Commission under the advisement of CFAB for several uses. These uses include management improvement of marine fisheries, conservation strategies, and education of commercial fishermen. CFAB unanimously approved one application for funding from the Marine Fisheries Improvement Fund at its meeting on August 7th, 2023. The application by the Virginia Commonwealth University is to provide a commercial fisheries coordinator for changes in ocean uses like the development of offshore wind. So the proposed project is coordinating the involvement of the Virginia ocean-based commercial fishing industry. The total request is $136,595.31 with a total project value of $363,155.65. So the proposal seeks the $136,595 in funding for a second year to appoint a Virginia ocean-based commercial fisheries coordinator and to hire technical consultants for economic and policy analyses on the impacts of new ocean developments, like offshore wind projects on Virginia's seafood industry. VCU's application aims to enhance collaboration between the VMRC and Virginia's ocean fishermen by supporting a dedicated commercial fisheries coordinator. It also emphasizes the importance of expert analysis of potential impacts of upcoming ocean developments, particularly offshore wind projects. I'm going to say that a lot, offshore wind projects. There are several letters of support from Virginia commercial license holders. I believe you all have copies of those letters. We received many. So to round it up, in alignment with CFAB's unanimous decision, staff recommends approval of the allocation of funds amounting to $136,595.31 for this project. These funds will be drawn from the Marine Fishing Improvement Fund, a resource dedicated to safeguarding Virginia's marine fisheries and bolstering the resilience of the state's vital seafood industry. That's it.
Just so we can be clear, there's 2 commission members that serve on CFAB, so this has been vetted and been very well. I've received nothing but support for this project from those interested parties on the money, i.e. commercial seafood industry. So it was a unanimous vote during CFAB. I was present for that meeting, and I didn't include all the letters of support because I probably got several hundred of them.
There were a lot of them, yeah.
That being said, any questions for Zach from Commission? That being said, matter is before the Commission for approval of this project from CFAB.
Make a motion to accept staff recommendation for approval.
Got a motion to accept from Mr. Erskine, a second from Mr. Bransom. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And I think we have one more, ADV, I think we added it to the back. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Number 8. All right, Mrs. Peabody, the floor is yours.
Okay, I also will be brief. Okay, as you're aware, in 2023, the VMRC was allocated $3 million from the legislative session to fund abandoned and derelict vessel removal. We are managing that through a grant program to localities as well as to the Indian Nations in Virginia to utilize for removal of abandoned and derelict vessels. The Nansemond Indian Nation has provided an application for a total of $26,000 for a boat that has been a thorn in their side since I have been working with them for several years, so it'll be nice to see this removed. The request is for $26,000 for the investigation, removal, and disposal of an abandoned vessel adjacent to their property at the Nansemond River. They are partnering with the Elizabeth River Project, who is going to be doing the titling work, so they'll go through the process of removing that title and then hiring a contractor to remove the vessel, which is in very shallow water. So it is going to take additional work to get into that shallow water to remove the vessel. So here are 2 pictures of the vessel that they propose to remove. And Cameron, a representative from the Nansemond Indian Nation, is here to answer any questions that you may have as well.
Is there anyone in the public? Well, hold on, wait a minute. Is there any questions for Ms. Peabody from the Commission?
And I didn't get to this part. So although the commission approval is not necessary for this program, staff does come to the commission every month, one, to inform you and to keep you up to date on what is going for the program. And we are asking for a vote of confidence. The application that was received by the Nansemond Nation is consistent with the ADV grant policy manual, and we're recommending approval.
This is, everyone, this is the $3 million that was put in legislation last year. Ms. Callum?
Just one quick question. So you actually pay out the actual receipts, is the 26,000 estimated dollar amount?
So this is an estimated amount. We will give them the advance funds of $26,000. After it's finished, we will settle up, so they will provide their receipts. And then if they did not spend any of that additional money, the agreement says they will provide it back to us.
And also, if there's overage, they're allowed to apply for more as well, because sometimes you just don't know if it's got fuel, it winds up having fuel, costs more to get rid of, and all that other stuff, so they may run over. Mr. Erskine?
I just had a question prior to this, if this gets approved. We've had several of these requests over the last few meetings. How much funding is remaining? Do you know that?
So of the 3 million, we've spent about 350,000. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And a lot of requests to continue rolling it over if they don't do something, but speed it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this matter? For or against? That being said, matters before the commission.
Move to approve staff recommendations.
Got a motion to approve staff recommendations
Second.
from Mr. Minor, a second from Mr. Headley. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mrs. Peabody. Great work. That being said, there looks like there's no further business on my agenda. The next commission meeting will be held Tuesday, September the 26th, 2023. We'll see y'all there.